Hey, great morning. I hope that you found it refreshing, good, and impactful. No small effort by Sean, and it looks like Halls ran out. She'll be back, and I just really appreciate the efforts they expended. That's no small effort with the two of them as individuals kind of compiling that data. That's I have a really good team. I want to thank Dr. Ben Copeland, who was here during lunch. I think he got to talk to some of you. I know that was an interest that Mr. Mistingy brought that up as far as wanting to have an engagement, just even outside of regular, conversation we had. We made sure that he got God's chicken while he was here. That was good. This afternoon, more of the story. So again, I prefaced this just a second ago. We have Donna Witt, our Chief Financial Officer. We have Gregory Patrick, who is our Deputy City Manager, both of whom are very, very, very good at what they do, and I appreciate their efforts quite a bit. Again, I'd be remiss, and Anna Benson would get on me if I did not also include these remarks. As we continue to tell the story of the city in our services, let's build upon what we've learned this morning and prepare for budget deliberations over the next few months. I've asked Deputy City Manager Greg Patrick and our Chief Financial Officer Donna Witt to take this opportunity to walk us through the process of building a municipal budget with an update on fiscal year 2024 year end. They will demonstrate how data-driven, data-informed insights guide fiscal planning, prioritize community needs, and ensure transparency in allocating services. And I will take this moment. I do want to thank Senator Peake having called just a second ago to inquire how our water is. He had heard about the break on Boonesboro, and he himself is home here. Glad he's home, but he should be in Richmond, and things being what they are, his ears must have been burning because he was concerned that if there's anything that we need to help ensure or shore up our water services, he was calling us to make. I said, we're here at the retreat doing good work and making sure. Yes, sir.
We have a generator for, since you mentioned it.
Yes, sir.
Do we have a backup generator if the power goes down to our water treatment plant and facilities?
Yes, sir.
I'm 99% sure we do. I can't imagine
I
we
believe
don't.
we do also. I just
But
think
we
it would be,
can
that out.
confirm
would be
that and put it in the memo to you guys.
something good to put out to the
Yeah.
citizens with that, being
Yes,
something
sir.
that happens.
topical.
110%.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
So with that, I turn it over to Gregory and Donna. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manager. Excited to be here today to talk the opening stages of budget development and budget deliberations for this council. As you all know, Donna Witt is the GOAT. How many budgets have you done now, Donna?
20, I think.
So she knows a thing or
22.
two about building a budget in Lynchburg. She's going to kick us off today. One thing I'll say is some of the information that we have in here, many of you may know, but again, this is going out, will be posted online, so it'll be good for anyone who watches to have a good understanding, and hopefully all of you will pick up some insights as we go through this information. So bear with us as we kind of walk you soup to nuts through the process of building a municipal budget. With that, over to Ms. Witt.
Thank you. And I will caveat this presentation. We are admittedly budget nerds, but I'm also an accounting geek. So I'm really in that square box. So some of this you're going to go, really? But yeah, we get super excited about this stuff. So
We do too.
we will caveat with that. And I think, is this going to work for me?
Yes, it did.
That is exciting. If I can hit it. Okay, we're going to start with the budget overview. And again, like Greg said, this is starting out very basic. Most of you know all of this, but we do want to make sure this is kind of general information that's out there. And of course, our fiscal year versus calendar year, by state code, we have a fiscal year of July 1st through June 30th, so we are not on a calendar basis. We are required by state code to have a balanced budget. So no deficit spending. I can't print money. I don't have a tree in my office that I get to pluck from periodically. That died a long time ago. So I really, black thumb here. So I really, look at the plants in my office. We can't print money, so it really is, we are required by law to have a balanced budget. And you're going to hear me say many times by state code, because really, everything in finance, in budget, we have a state code that tells us when we do it, why we do it, and how we do it. So we really are very strictly run by state code. So we have different kind of funds. So I know most of you are familiar with the general fund, and that's where most of city services are provided. That's your police, fire, public works, parks and rec, human services, manager's office, support departments like accounting and HR. All of those are in general fund, and they are predominantly funded by tax dollars or some type of fee. So that's how we fund the general fund. Now, our non-general fund are also called enterprise funds. So we have water, sewer, stormwater, and airport. And they're enterprise funds, meaning that the fees that they generate has to 100% support their operations. So the general fund does not supplement water, sewer, stormwater, and airport, and nor do they supplement the general fund. So there are some services that are kind of shared, that some money does flow back and forth that way to support, but it's based on shared responsibilities. And then the capital fund is completely different. So that's where our maintenance projects are. That's where our large capital projects are. Sometimes we've got some large equipment in there. We have a radio replacement fund in there. And the general fund, we call their capital project City Cap. And then, but there's also a capital fund for water, sewer, stormwater, and airport. But again, those are supported differently than the city capital project, which is supported by debt service in the general fund. But that also includes school projects, because the city owns the city school buildings. City council school board relationship, I'm sure you're aware, you appoint the school board members. But that relationship is the board works with their staff and comes up with a budget that is submitted to city council for consideration. And then the deliberations happen there. The city schools also are responsible to submit their capital plan to city council to be considered as part of budget funding. Now, Dillon's rule, there's Judge Dillon. He is not Bob's cousin, not even brother-in-law. But he was a judge back in the 1800s, and he pretty much came up with a rule that has stuck with us all these years, that if we don't have authority by the General Assembly, a locality cannot do it. So when the General Assembly meets and they set their rules and their laws, that's what we have to abide by. So we don't get to say, well, wow, we need some different revenues, so we're going to charge red cars more. We don't get to do that. We can't decide, if you're under 5 feet tall, you have another charge. But, if you're over 6 feet, you should get a bigger charge because you take up more space. But anyway, we don't get to decide things like that. So just having some fun.
Was a heightist.
Yes. Oh, there's a good word. But anyway, so we have to follow the Dillon rule, as does the whole Commonwealth of Virginia. So that is another thing that we're kind of in that state box. So they tell us what we do. We have state code that dictates not only finance, but just about every department has state code that they have to follow. But Dillon's rule is special to Virginia and our General Assembly, and we have to follow those as well. So just trying to give you an idea of what the city is responsible for and what makes it up. Our population is about 80,736 people. City employees, and this is all funds. So this is general fund and those enterprise funds. We've got 1,439 full-time equivalents. So, and that's broken down. I wanted to specifically put some sworn in there so you kind of get an idea of that as well. So we've got 901 full-time classified, 366 full-time sworn. And then we have part-time and grant funding, hourly sworn, and then our 54 state-funded positions are generally our constitutional officers and their staff. And so we do receive funding for some of these, like our grant-funded positions. Those are generally funded by an outside grant fund, so they're not funded by tax dollars or fees. And also our state-funded positions. Our constitutional officers, their salary is funded by the state, but the city picks up their benefits. And then there's positions in their offices may or may not be 100% funded by the state, but we do receive significant funding to help offset some of that. And then also, just to give you a breath about what we have to maintain, we have approximately 200 structures that are city-owned, which equates to about 1 million square feet of building space. So that's our courts, libraries, community center, municipal buildings. But in addition to that, we have 16 primary and secondary schools. So that's kind of our buildings. We've got 817 lane miles, 10,944 street lights, 78 bridges or major culverts, and then 953 acres of park and more than 40 miles of trail. So when you think about the responsibility the city has and what we have to maintain, that maintenance that is in our capital plan to maintain these is critical. That's where we have our funding. We don't have maintenance money in our operational budget, except for Donna's $300,000 that we put in 2025 that I'm very proud of to try to start trying to find ongoing revenues to support our maintenance. Because right now, our maintenance is funded by excess funds from the previous fiscal year end. So we're going to get more of that later. The other thing that I think is interesting is we talked about how we compare ourselves to other cities, because in the counties, they don't have to take care of their bridges, their culverts, their lane miles. They don't have street lights, but their transportation projects are 100% paid by VDOT. It's on the city to pay for all of this. So by state code, VDOT does not pay for all of our transportation projects. We're fortunate to get some 50-50 money from VDOT for some of our larger projects. We get some highway maintenance funds that help us with paving, some sidewalks, and some other things. But it's important to remember that this is on the city, and we've got to take care of our stuff. We don't get help. So, and that just makes it kind of different. And then when you think about on the staff side, in the county, they don't have a paid police force. They've got sheriffs and deputies that are mostly funded by the state. We have sheriffs and deputies, but they don't do our policing. We have our sworn. So we pay for 388 sworn that are not paid for in counties. You know, in our fire department, we always say, you want to have a heart attack, you're going to have it in the city, because we're going to get there really, really quick. In the county, maybe not. So my husband's the county administrator in Charlotte County. We had this conversation last night. He said, but we're going to get you in 15 minutes. And I was like, okay, but you can die in 15 minutes. But just some of the differences between a city and a county.
Dan and Donna they're great. They are a fantastic couple.
Yeah, we have these really different conversations at home. Yeah, well, Walt's right there with him. He's his chairman now. So we probably have different conversations at our house than anybody. When we travel, we point out sign ordinances, traffic, different trash carts. Yeah, we're about all of that. So, yeah. A little weird at the Witt House, but that's okay. So anyway, back to my difference between counties and cities. It's just something to think about when you think about all that we have to fund. Because as a city, you know, we're here for our services. People expect services when they're a city resident. Also in your counties, you know, they're not coming to get your trash, your brush and bulk, your leaf pickup. Those aren't services that counties provide, but those are expected services in the city. So just things to think about when we look at this city snapshot about why we have so much that we're responsible for, because it takes people to provide those services. So I want to go into these financial management policies, and I apologize, this is a lot of words on the next couple of slides here, but these are really important. I work closely with our Government Finance Officers Association. They are an international company that really works to set up best practices for local governments for finance. And so we really work with them to make sure that what we're doing is the best of the best. And they came out with these financial management policies a number of years ago. The city adopted them. They come to city council. They are adopted by city council. And they really help us set our budget, manage our finances in every way. And just to this first sentence, the primary objective of sound financial management policies is for the city council to create a framework within which financial decisions can be made. So this really gives you some parameters that help you be best practice for being fiscally conservative, efficient, and sound, which is what we want to be. I really take great pride in my years with the city in really working with great city council members to set this city up for success. That's what we're here to do, because we want this city to be here a long time after us. So it's really important to me that we set this city up for success. And these financial management policies are a big part of that.
I think nothing illustrates that so clearly as when we were at one of these rating agency presentations, and the rating agency analyst asked Donna a question, and Donna looked at him and just says, "Donna doesn't do funky."
I'm surprised it has not ended up on a t-shirt, but yeah, Donna doesn't do funky. So, no, we are very conservative.
We're making sweaters.
Yes.
Stay tuned for the brands.
But yeah, we are a conservative, sound local government. And that's going to be what I am as long as I'm sitting in this chair. And I've appreciated every council that I've had the privilege of working with that has come alongside of me to help make sure we do that, because that's important. But these financial policies, I don't want to read all this to you, but it really does help us look at everything we do and our day-to-day operations, as far as our cash flow, as far as what's in our rainy day fund, that really set us up to be a great city. So we do have 4 financial management policies. The first is our fund balance policy. Many of you are familiar with our unassigned fund balance in the general fund. We always have lots of discussion. And by our policy, and to Greg's point, the rating agencies, this is something they focus on clearly. And, our goal is to have our highest rating possible, because that helps lower our interest cost and what we pay for our capital projects. So they expect to see a fund balance and a rainy day fund of at least 15%. So we're not there, but what I communicate to our credit rating agencies is we may not budget it to begin the year, but we always end up over 15% when we close the year, because we do budget conservatively. So I know that at the end of the year, there's going to be money left, but that's going to help my fund balance grow above that 15%, so that when rating agencies rate us, they're seeing that we are consistently even above 20% for the most part. and that's really critical. So right now, we're budgeting for our rainy day fund to be about 11.8% on the front end. So that's really good that we've grown that far from 10%. We have a debt management policy. So our debt service can be no more than 10% of our expenditures. So when we start looking at our capital budget and what's in our capital budget, a lot of times I'm like whittling those projects down not because we have a state code for debt capacity. We're not even close to our debt capacity, but where we come into issues with is this 10% of expenditures. So if you think your general fund budget's maybe $225 million, well, your debt service can't be more than $22 million. And right now, we're over $20 million. So that's something that we have to look at very closely when we look at these projects to make sure that we're not going above that 10%. So a lot of times that helps us kind of rein in how much we're borrowing for our major projects. Also, as I've mentioned, the budget, by our financial management policies, we have to be we have to be balanced. So the city manager, when he provides a proposed budget to you, it's going to be balanced. He can't give it to you and say, well, we really need to spend this, but it's up to you all to find this other money. We don't do that. That's not where we are. So we have to provide a balanced budget. And then our investments, it is very clearly set in the Code of Virginia, in the Investment of Public Funds Act, exactly how I invest city funds. So I don't get to buy lottery tickets. With city funds, I don't invest in the stock market. It is a very conservative, sound way that only things that we can invest in. And this is a big part of our cash flow. So, because you're thinking, why would you invest money? Why would you have money to invest? But if you think about it, we have 4 big real estate due dates, and we have 2 big personal property due dates. And so, but the last one is May 15th for real estate, June 5th for personal property. Well, right now, our payroll's about $4 million a pay period. So I have to make it from that June 5th pay period, or due date for personal property, all the way to November 15th, when our next big payment is for real estate. So you got $8 million going out a month for just payroll. That's not our other expenditures. That's not debt service. So it's critical that I have money very soundly invested that I can grow so that I can pull that out as I need it over the summer. So cash flow is a really big part of why we do investments the way we do investments. And I know sometimes you don't think about how the money has to come in and go back out, but that's really a big critical part of what I do, is to manage those cash funds. These policies are reviewed every 2 years. We work with our financial advisors. Davenport and Company currently has our contract. We work with them. They review them based on new criteria from rating agencies, from other best practices like at GFOA, and they help me to make sure if we need to adjust any of those. So they're either revised or reaffirmed every 2 years. They are due to be reviewed before the end of this fiscal year, so you will be seeing those. The policies in full are in the adopted 2025 budget. There's a tab for financial management policies, so if you want to read those, I encourage you to do that, and because they are that important, and they are in there in full.
Kind of while you're transitioning, we call the acronym police, and we want to make sure that you're staying true. GFOA.
Oh, Government Finance Officers Association. Thank you. So we talked a little bit about comparing our capital versus our operating budget. So the big projects that we put in the capital plan have to last, if we're gonna borrow for them, they've got to last more than 20 years, because that's the life of a bond. Some bonds are 30 years, but that's typically more of our infrastructure, like water and sewer projects, because they're going to be in the ground a whole lot more than 30 years. And then, but when you talk about bridges and things like that, you know, they've got to be maintained and all that. So we typically only borrow for 20 years for those. But that is our physical infrastructure. And I kind of mentioned how we funded those. But a lot of times, we're going to go into this a little more as well, but we'll use cash for the maintenance projects. But our CIP plan, our capital improvement plan, is a lot of maintenance because it's not funded in the operating fund. So it's critical that we keep track of those 200 structures in our capital plan and that maintenance and how we fund those. But and again, we talked about how the operating side is more your day-to-day operations, your police, your fire, all of that. It covers the programs that we do. All that is in the operating fund, as well as our funding for schools.
We had a quick question.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good, Donna. I promised a bunch more questions.
That's
I'm
fine.
going to email you a bunch of these with follow-up yesterday. Appreciate y'all's time yesterday and today. What I'm kind of trying to assess is really that maintenance piece and how that fits into things. And so when we're talking about the unassigned fund balance, how would you define that in contrast with surplus? Because if maintenance is not in the general fund, how are we looking at surplus? How are we defining the unassigned fund balance? And then can you also contrast that with where we're needing to go with rainy day in order to meet that threshold when it comes to bond service?
Okay, so our unassigned fund balance is basically at the end of the fiscal year, you look at your revenues and you look at your expenditures. So if our revenues are more than budget, that falls to fund balance. If our expenditures are less than what we budgeted, that also falls to fund balance. And so that kind of becomes what people look at as your surplus for the year. And then we go through a calculation, and part of that is the rainy day fund.
Okay.
So by this policy, we automatically take at least the 11.8 that we've grown to budget for, and we set that aside, and we don't touch that unless the world comes to an end. So we don't want to dip into those funds. So once you pull those out, and I'll walk you through the calculation for the end of '24, but then you'll come up with a pot of money, and that is your true surplus. And that can be spent for one-time expenditures.
And that's before maintenance expenditures still?
Right, that
Okay.
can be used for maintenance expenditures or other one-time projects.
Okay.
So, it's always my recommendation that we use as much as that as possible for maintenance, because that's the pot we have.
And sorry, thank you. How do we define maintenance? Because when we were talking about, for example, when Holly was talking about some of the trucks and various equipment earlier, I asked if that would be maintenance or if that's included in a separate portion of the budget, and you said, well, that was operational under that department. So what is qualified as maintenance and what is built into a schedule for the departments?
Well, fleet department and the maintenance of vehicles is separate from what's in our capital program.
Okay, so it's separate from the buildings because it's a separate department.
Right, and
Okay.
that department, we fund that maintenance within that department. And
Okay.
it's actually called an internal service fund.
Okay.
I can explain that later.
Thank you, yeah.
But the maintenance that we're looking at is whether a building needs refurbished for windows, carpet, paint, but also the HVAC systems. We have a roof program, that type of maintenance to
Okay.
really keep our buildings in good condition. But it's not just the paint and carpet, it's the big structural keeping it sound.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you, Donna.
You have a question?
Kind of.
I say you're looking
A lot
at
of
me.
these things, thank you. The way I look at my own home, because I've had 2 homes in the last 5 years, and that's crazy, don't even go me there, but you got 200 of them, right? And I look at the way the city does it, very similar. I know it's not exactly the same. This is the way I look at my home, and I've got a home maintenance list that I maintain to what it's, especially when you got two, you gotta figure out what needs to be done next. And if you got a big expenditure coming, you know, you either pay it over time or you try to save up and be ready for it. Does every one of those 200 buildings have a maintenance list that is maintained and public information?
Public Works does a phenomenal job on figuring out maintenance for all those buildings. And they do have a schedule. I don't know if it's as detailed as you might be thinking for your own home, but they do have a schedule of where they're looking at HVAC and roofs and that kind of thing.
All your major building systems.
I'll speak to that as having been a consumer of that in the past. It's pretty detailed. Like, they'll come out and tell you when they're putting LED light bulbs in and replacing incandescents. Like,
Yeah.
hey, we're doing that next year. Hey, your HVAC system is due for cleaning in 2 years. We're gonna do that. You're due, like, that's how,
Right.
and it's all driven. So a lot of the stuff is driven by that one section of the CIP that's got all those building maintenance
Right,
items in it.
right.
If I'm thinking dashboard, I'm thinking, you know, I don't need 200 gauges that go green, yellow, red for every building. But I don't know, maybe that would be really helpful so we could see which ones are at risk.
In 20-plus years in this business, working for a couple of localities, what you run in is where cities scrimp and make up, because they don't always, there are plenty of priorities, is called M&O, Maintenance and Operations. So we're going to bring online 97,000 square feet in February, brand new police headquarters. And there are at least 4 new FTEs that went in this last budget, all of whom are to clean 96,000 square feet, 97,000 square feet. If we're being dutiful, we're planning every 5 years some kind of review of that. And what you'll find, that is going to be, I think, one of the first new buildings built absent maybe a school in Lynchburg. If you look at the buildings that we have, our library was a former Sears, our city hall is a former post office. So we do
Yeah,
well to
but-
reuse many of the things. Our
Yeah,
police
the
headquarters we're
group
moving out of is a church, right? And so we have aged infrastructure that when it comes to it, because what Donna said, she was proud, she called it Donna's 300,000, right? You should be socking that away like a homeowner. It's just in, when you have as much as we do and as many priorities that there are and different understandings of how we, meet those, some of what happens is that M&O goes by the wayside. So those, remember when we talked about trucks and when to replace them? If you listened, I know you did, we said it's optimally in 7 years, but what you heard is that we do it in longer years, right? Whether or not it's when we order them or what have you, it's just the reality. I know that at least a couple budget cycles ago, or at least maybe in this last one, remember we had 12th Street fall in on us. And those are the things you can't account for, right? So those are those things for those rainy day that you kind of help make sure that you maintain. So, but I thank you for having raised that. I just thought to interject there for that one piece.
Sorry, follow up on that. Is this the way that Lynchburg's always done budget with M&O as far as, okay? And there
Long as I've
wasn't,
been here.
Okay.
There's never been enough money to be able to budget ongoing revenue for maintenance.
I remember a couple of years ago, Dr. Boydica put up a spreadsheet. We were having a workshop at the GLTC building, and it was a list of all the projects we had over like the next 20 plus years, from buildings, from this maintenance, roofs. It was overwhelming because it was just about the money that was needed for all the infrastructure needs that we had in our city. I mean, that was just maybe helpful to see. This is a big spreadsheet of all the needs that we have, where sometimes people think, oh, you always extra money left. All the needs are always here because you have old buildings, old infrastructure, sewer, water situations, pipes old, 100 years old. You have so many old, like I said, old buildings, things that need maintenance, roofs. It's always something that has to be done.
Yeah, just like
And
our
some of that
houses.
measure, and Mr. Mitchell has brought it up, there's a timetable by which, and I think many of you, I talked about the fueling station that's on, what is it, Dr. King Memorial, it's several
Yeah,
different things.
yeah.
Fifth.
Memorial.
That is a station, thankfully, that we have a plan for and that we have authorization to make a capital investment in. But we've also had to, over time, because of other priorities and other just more imminent needs. So we have a timetable that shows when they should be replaced as far as light bulbs and what have you. But maybe some of those, when you say a light bulb as opposed to, and I'm going to be a bit grandiose in this, a gas station that could explode. We're going to wait on the light bulb to do the gas station. You know, that make that sense. So those things kind of move around sometimes. And there's so in the latter half of February we'll come forward with a capital improvement plan, and you'll see at some point kind of the evolution of the budget, and that the capital improvement there's a whole body that looks at these things and is making sure that we're paying attention to the different things.
So, two things. First thing is,
Is that me?
what are we doing with the old police station? Is that something we intend to keep, or are we gonna try to offload that, right? Just, I'd love you to answer it, and the second thing, I'll follow up after you answer that.
One man's trash is another man's treasure, and I mean that with sincere love. And one of the things that we do really well here is to ensure that we, whatever the life expectancy of something, and push it by at least, Ted, hold on to me, 100 years, okay? And so, so the police department, one man's trash, not trash, is going to be the sheriff's department's treasurer. They're going to move in. I said to Sheriff Sloan, as is, and I say that interestingly enough, in the treasure piece is, right now, currently, the sheriff's office, each Friday, they themselves clean their own offices. And when they heard that they were going to have custodial services, you would have thought that they got a brand new home on the river. You know, they were really, really excited. So I think we talked a little bit about, you know, what do they call broken window syndrome? You know, the idea of something that's closed or what have you. We heard from the judges, because another thing that's coming due is the courts and how antiquated they are and the need and investment. One of the things that we've looked at is to ensure that there's public safety, and one of the things we heard acutely from them was to have the police, or the public safety presence, the sheriff's office, that would be that adjacent. So that is the plan for the police headquarters, is that once they vacate, we're going to do a bit of capital investment ourselves. They have a bit of money that they've been using for rent, and help with that.
Second thing.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Is when you mentioned the gas station that's gonna explode.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
So.
Everyone,
Once
please.
upon a time.
No, it's not.
Well, once upon a time, I was parked on a dam that was gonna break, and I was sitting on top of it on a fire engine when the CNN headlines were the dam was gonna break. The dam was not gonna break, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't have been allowed to be on a fire engine.
Sure.
So we just need to make sure we're very objective about these things.
Oh, yeah.
Because saying a dam's gonna break is a great excuse to spend $40 million, right?
And I wasn't here for that. I will say, great thing about Kurt, what do I want to call it? Your Vice Mayor Kurt. I have Chuck Kramer, because I wanted to conflate the two. Chuck Kramer, former Air Force guy. His level of blood pressure doesn't deviate from here. So when I got a blood pressure call that was this because of the gas station, I paid attention. So I've got good people that help measure. Yeah.
Pay attention.
So that was a.
It's not a Washington Monument play.
It was not a no.
Yeah.
Mr. Frawley, were you asking? You're right. Okay. Dara?
All right, moving on. So, budget staff, we literally work in 3 budgets at a time. So as we're closing out the previous year's budget, the next one's already started, and we're looking at the third one. So we're constantly reviewing revenues and expenditures, department expenditures, and how things are coming, and how the year comes to a close while we're in a current fiscal year and working with departments. And then always, I mean, July 1 and the new budget comes, we're already looking at the next one. So that's something that we constantly do, because it's that important. So, and just kind of give you a big idea here of where our money comes in. So these are our top 5 revenues. So in our adopted 25 budget, it's about $227 million. So our real estate tax makes up, that's our largest revenue source. It's $68.8 million. Personal property taxes is $30 million, but 5.5 of that comes from the state. And if you remember, Governor Gilmore and his Personal Property Tax Relief Act, we receive about $5.5 million from the state, so that's part of that $30 million. And how that gets distributed is this great calculation that I am so glad the Commissioner of Revenue is responsible for. So one of the main things he does for me. Our local sales tax is our next largest one. What we've budgeted is about $22 million, and very close to that now is our meals tax revenue is about $21.5 million. Business license is right at $11 million is what we projected in the 25 budget. And so this top five makes up our 67.3% of our total revenues in the general fund, our non-dedicated. Now, our revenues from state and federal government, we've talked a little bit about these human services programs, highway maintenance. We do get $599 money from the state that is specific for law enforcement. It's not enough, and if you want my real opinion, I'll tell you later. And because they are way behind in funding that. And then our state shared expenditures. So that's like our constitutional officers and things, but that's part of our dedicated revenue. So again, that's where the majority of our revenues come from. And then how do we spend it? So our schools is our largest expenditure at $39.4 million. Police aren't far behind at $31.1. Public Works at $27.1. Human Services at $27. And fire at $25.2. So that's 64% of our total revenues, or our total expenditures. So something to note here, in budgeting in my tenure, until the last, about 3 years ago, if you added your public safety money together, it was still not as much as we funded schools. And that has swapped. And a lot of that is because of the importance of public safety, that City Council has spent that money to grow our public safety program as needed. But it's just interesting. It used to be schools was far more than our public safety, and that has now swapped. So just something to note.
All right. Next, we're going to kind of walk through the budget development process and then a very high-level look ahead at the FY 2026 budget. So in this first slide, what you see here is the budget development cycle. And the most important thing to take away here is really the minute City Council approves the budget, we're working on the next budget. So by the summer, we're having operational meetings with departments. We're developing the base budget in the fall and into the winter. Departments submit budget requests in the fall and winter, and the way that we request these departments to submit these requests is very specific, right? So we want to know two things. Number one, tell us those things that it's going to take for you to maintain the current level of service. So what are your contractual, the escalations that are built into the contracts that you have for operations? What are the inflationary costs that you're seeing? Are there any annualized costs that we need to take into consideration? And then centrally, we're looking at employee benefits. Employee benefits is a huge budget driver. In this upcoming year, you're going to see a pretty substantial increase in employee health care costs. It's simply because we've seen our claims costs go up substantially, primarily related to the incidences of cancer. So we're building the base budget. We're looking at revenue projections. It's pretty early at this point for revenue projections. Most of our revenues are reported or recorded to us a month, many of them 2 months behind. Then we have many of you may be familiar with speed dating. We do speed budgeting. So all of the departments, including our kith and kin, get an opportunity to come and present their budgets to the city manager, talk to the city manager about their budgets. Winter loves sitting still for 3 days. It's one of his favorite things to do. In February, we finalized the proposed budget decisions. We balanced the budget. And then there are really two budgets each year, right? So in February, the city manager will present his capital budget and in March, the operating budget. Council will deliberate over the budget for 2 to 3 months in March and May. And then in May and June, City Council will adopt their budget, which will go into operation on July 4th. Rinse, repeat, we do the same thing over again the next year. So we talked about developing the base budget. This is kind of what it looks like from a linear perspective. We're going to start with the fiscal year 2025 adopted budget, both on the revenue and the expenditure side. Then we are going to remove one-time items. So one-time items are just like they sound, just as they sound like those things that we purchased that we don't have to purchase again, right? So if we purchased a car for the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, or we set aside $1.6 million in this last budget to make sure that the schools had the funding sufficient to keep the two schools open during this fiscal year. Those were one-time expenses. We'll remove those from the budget. On the revenue side, we've reached the end of the 2-year fee waiver for the trash collection fee and for the vehicle license fee. So we have to add that ongoing revenue back into the budget. Then we'll annualize prior year actions. So the best example of this is the police headquarters. In this budget, the police headquarters is scheduled to open in February. It's going to cost about $30,000 a month for utilities in the new police headquarters. So we put about 3 or 4 months worth of utilities expenses in last year's budget, but we're going to need 12 months in this upcoming budget. The same thing, looking forward, we're anticipating that the fire station that we're building in partnership with Liberty will likely be open for a month or two in the FY 2026 budget. So we'll budget for a month or two of that lease expense. But then in the 27 budget, we'll have to pick up the remaining 11 or 12 months of costs. And then, of course, we'll adjust for inflation, benefits, debt service, contracts, so on and so forth. That gets us to our base budget, both on the revenue and the expenditure. On the expenditure side, we're doing all the things you can see here on this linear graph. On the revenue side, we're updating our revenue projections. That's how we form the base budget. We'll compare what our base expenses are with what our base revenues are, and then that'll produce either a budget gap or a budget surplus. Most of the time, it is not a budget surplus. That's just how these things work. From there, after you build the base, then you factor in considerations above the base budget. So what are those things? Those are anything new, anything beyond the level of service that we're providing now. So step increases for police officers and firefighters. Here we are here. And a cost of living increase for city employees, any new services or positions, any changes, any increases to funding that might be included for Lynchburg City Schools. Those items are not in the base. Again, what's in the base? Updated salary and benefits cost, contractual and inflationary increases, facilities cost, annualization of prior year actions. Thank you, Donna. So when we start to assess the revenue base, we'll start there first. What do we look at? First, what are the general economic conditions, right? What are our current collections look like? You'll see on an upcoming slide, meals tax, for instance. Our meals tax collections this year are actually pointing to us not meeting budget in that particular area. So we're always monitoring what our current collections look like. We will meet with our Commissioner of the Revenue. I've got to tell you, I'm not sure how many folks realize it, but we have an absolute legend as a Commissioner of the Revenue. Both within his trade group, amongst all the Commissioner of Revenues around the state, and here locally, Mitch Knuckles is somebody that would be very difficult to do this work without. His staff is incredibly knowledgeable. They are so good with the data that they have. They use it appropriately. They help Donna immensely understand what revenues, especially our consumer revenues, sales tax, meals tax, hotel, admissions tax, are going to look like. It'd be tough to do this without him. It sounds like he may have paid me to say that. I promise you, he did not. Then we take a look at growth and development around the city. So this is going to be, we mentioned Rosedale is the single largest, the single highest assessed property in the city. That's a brand new development, right? So we're looking for, are there any other developments like that that will be coming online that are big enough that they are going to drive, that they're actually going to drive revenue. When a Chick-fil-A came on board, Chick-fil-A had a big enough impact on our meals tax that we had to take that into consideration when we were actually forecasting revenues. I learned this recently. For years, it was the Olive Garden. That was the number one producing meals tax restaurant in the city of Lynchburg. But Chick-fil-A has outpaced Olive Garden
When
at this
it
point.
opened on Ward's Road,
A single Chick-fil-A
Mm-hmm.
is outpaced it?
on Ward's Road,
Yeah.
number one restaurant.
Chick-fil-A is not only God's chicken, it is
Lynchburg's
great for
chicken.
it is
Lynchburg's chicken.
it's great for tax. It's great
Everybody's
for tax
chicken.
revenue. We're also looking at economic development deals like has happened with Framatome, right? So Framatome is making investments. That's going to drive a number of different tax and revenue streams. And then, of course, we're assessing these taxes, but how is collections going, right? Are we on pace? Do we need to adjust whether or not our collection assumptions there? So if we take a very quick preliminary outlook at base revenues, here's what we're seeing. Consumer taxes, so sales, meals, lodging, amusement, are projected to be flat to declining. This is the first time really since the pandemic where in the budget we're going to see flat to declining consumer taxes. The growth in these taxes have really been the key to keeping up with inflationary costs across the city and investing in some of the city council priorities that the council has been able to invest in, most especially public safety, investments in public safety. Again, we mentioned the refuse collection and vehicle license tax is scheduled to resume after the 2-year waiver that council funded with one-time revenue a couple of years ago. And then, while it's too early for numbers, real estate reassessments are expected to grow based on market conditions. I think we've all seen, if you look out there at the demand for housing, especially housing in Lynchburg, it's far outpacing supply, and we've seen prices increase there. So if we look back at consumer tax growth, you guys have got the slide in front of you, but I'll walk you through it here. This starts with actuals in fiscal year 20 through 24, and we're looking at then you have the dotted line, then you have the budget in fiscal year 2025, and you have our updated projection in fiscal year 2025. So you see very strong consumer tax growth from 20 to through 24. 24 starts to level off. Our budget was up in 2025, fairly healthy, about 4%. But what we're actually seeing now is it's very early, but we're projected to be between $1 million and $1.5 million below budget in these revenue sources now that we've got our first 3 or 4 months of revenue actuals.
Thank you. So with the actual, do you all have the prior year's projection for each of those years and the trend, so we can see the projection, how it correlated with the actual and what that outlook was? That would be helpful. Thank you.
So we actually are looking at potentially a little decline here, which is why we're saying going into 26, we're assuming we're going to be flat to declining. Next slide. All right, assessing the expenditure base. So how do we do this? First, review current spending. Our departments spending the budget at their existing budgets at the rate we expect, our costs as we expect. What's the impact of inflation? All of you have likely seen significant inflation in your personal lives. So too with the government. The cost of doing business for us in providing services has increased year over year and continues to increase year over year. Contractual cost escalations. We have a lot of contracts for service across the city. Most of those contracts for service have escalations built into them, annual escalations. Assessing equipment needs. I think you saw from Holly's presentation, the equipment, especially some of our rolling stock, our fire apparatus, are very expensive. They're very complex. And it's very important that we stay, to the extent that we can, up to date on our replacement cycle. Because anytime you fall behind, and I saw this happen at the place of my last employment, when you fall behind on those replacement cycles, it is very difficult to get out of that hole.
Can I add something right there? One thing that you said, and it's perfectly fine, and this is not for the immediate group here, it's more just generally that people are tuning in, right? And so that one of the things that Donna said, she said there was a tree that she didn't have, it was called a money tree, right? And what happens is that we conflate sometimes, or I know that sometimes, at least in my job over the 20 plus years, in calling ourselves a government and not a municipal corporation, sometimes can be lost on our community that we have the same expenses of any one corporation. Now we're public, we're not private, and so there are certain things, actually even more restrictions that we are afforded. And so just a little happy amendment when you talked about government. We're a municipal corporation that has a board that we report to our shareholders who are the residents that are in our towns. And so in that respect, I want to make sure, and that's usually the the budget and brews when I have a conversation, is to remind that all the same expenses that that Frito-Lay, not all the same, but some of the same inflationary costs, contractual stuff, we have to recognize or remediate or mitigate ourselves. Keep it going, Greg.
Absolutely. We're going to take a look at the current level of vacancies. I know, Councilman Miskins, this is a question you frequently ask. How are we assuming personnel costs with levels of vacancies? We're taking that into consideration. New state mandates. Oftentimes, the state likes to give us some instructions or have us do new things. Don't always get the money to do that. We've got to keep that in mind as we're building the budget. And then, of course, reviewing opportunities for efficiency initiatives. I do believe we run a pretty tight ship here, but that doesn't mean there aren't always opportunities to do things better and more effectively. And we are always working to make sure that we're delivering services in the most effective and efficient way. So preliminary look ahead for the expenditure base in fiscal year 2026. So Council's needed investment in public safety has grown the expenditure base significantly. And most of that has been funded in the past with that growth in the consumer taxes that we saw, which is disappearing at this point. Those new public safety facilities that we talked about, the police headquarters and the fire station, are going to begin to put additional stress on the budget. Some of our big budget drivers in fiscal year 2026, health insurance increased cost. We're looking at probably $1.5 million or more of additional cost because of increasing medical claims. We already made changes this year to some of the structure of the benefits to limit some of that cost. And we will likely, employees will likely see an increase in their a portion of the healthcare contribution this year as well.
So what he means with that, so what a give and take, right? So fiscal year runs July 1 through June 30. So we've done things in other cities where we've done a general wage adjustment at January 1 as opposed to July 1. And no way that you can really impact morale really worse than to do a general wage adjustment on the fiscal year and then come back with an increase to the healthcare benefits that eats into that overall growth. So what Greg said there, I just want to make it more practical, rubber hit the road kind of thing, that we are accounting for expenses that we're going to see in healthcare, which is one of our biggest expenses in personnel, in a way in which that expense, we are because we want to be an employer choice. We're competing for the best people to do and perform the services that you see every day, and to ensure that 3% that you approved this past budget, which thank you very much, isn't then also immediately debited by the expense associated by healthcare going up. Just wanted to put a finer little detail.
Absolutely. Yeah, we got our healthcare consultants came back to us and gave us an estimate of claims costs, and they were significantly higher than we had expected. We'd actually experienced pretty moderate claims growth up until this year. And we wanted to make sure that if a increase in cost for health insurance is coming to employees, we give them lots of notice before they see that. So health insurance, local social and juvenile services costs. So a couple of areas here where we're seeing increased cost. Our CSA program, which is foster care and adoption, these are costs that we are mandated to pay a split with the state with. So whatever the actual costs are, I think we're required to pay 30%. Those costs have been increasing. So a fairly substantial increase there, and then an increase in our juvenile detention center per diem expenses are projected as well. GLTC funding, we have seen that, and this is to maintain the current level of service with GLTC. Their funding from the state has decreased. They have, for years, they were supplemented fairly heavily by Liberty University. When they ran the bus system for Liberty, Liberty had transitioned to its own fleet of buses, and it has been a difficult transition for GLTC. Liberty used to pay them up front, which kind of helped with from a cash flow standpoint. Liberty's running its own buses now. So to maintain the same level of service at GLTC, we're looking at around $400,000 in additional costs in this upcoming budget. And then, of course, we talked about other inflationary and contractual cost escalation. So bottom line, what are we seeing? We're going to need revenue growth to maintain our current level of services. We'll be able to refine those numbers for council probably in the next month or more, but that is preliminarily what we are looking at.
So, just to be clear, when you say revenue growth, you're asking for a tax increase?
I think we're going to need more revenue than we had in the last budget. I'm not sure if we want to maintain the same level of service. If we're going to need new revenue somewhere. We're hopeful that presidential election happens. Everyone ahead of the presidential election wasn't spending, right? And then all of a sudden, no matter who's elected, sometimes all of a sudden the floodgates open and people start spending. So maybe we're going to see some consumer revenue increases. Maybe we're going to get additional revenue from the General Assembly. But hope springs eternal. At the same time, the other part of that discussion is, are we providing the right level of services, right? But yes, if we want to, if things continue as we think they will, which is flat consumer tax growth, if we want to maintain that same level of service, we're probably going to need new tax revenue.
Because where I'm at with that is, if you look at consumer spending being down, right? There could be a reason for that. It's because it's just more expensive for folks to live. If it's more expensive for folks to live, it's not the right time to increase taxes on them. That's just where I'm at.
I think that question is a good one to ask, but I do think it's limited in scope of what our options are. I don't think the question is inherently fair in that, so what you're saying is tax increase. What I'm hearing is we need to reevaluate our spending. I'm not hearing we need more tax dollars. I'm hearing we need to amend what we do to create more of them for the things that matter. It doesn't mean we need an additional dollar necessarily. So that's what I hear. What's important, make it happen. So I just want to encourage this council, try to think positively, try to find a different way to approach it. It's not just, well, you need to increase taxes. Okay, does this project matter more or less than it did last year? Does that free us up to do more monies, to do certain things that matter to the city? It doesn't have to be as clean cut as it's being presented, and I just want to make sure we're trying to be as positive in our mindset. It's not just, are you asking for more cash? You're asking for more flexibility. And so there's another option, and I think having a good, strong look at our spending can help us with that.
Absolutely.
Will the increase in building permits help?
I think we have to take a look at what is actually going to come online and start producing real estate tax revenue for us. You know, if you figure you have $100 million in new building permit, this is just a meatball math, right? We had close to $100 million in new building permits. If we have $100 million of assessment increase as a result of those building permits, that generates, what, $890,000 in new revenue at 89 cents? So to that extent, absolutely. I think when you look at that apartment complex, so the one that Sean mentioned, that's going in off of, across from the Holy Cross site, or next to on Langern Road, if we know we've got, you know, a 200-plus unit apartment complex coming online, that each of those buildings had a construction cost estimate of around $7 million. You know, that is a development that, if it's going to come online to help us in the 2026 budget year, where we would actually make an adjustment probably to our revenue assess or projections as a result of it.
Can you back up to that last slide? So just to be clear, what we're looking at here, when we're looking at health insurance, local social and juvenile service costs, GLTC funding, and other inflationary increases in contractual cost escalations, these are all operating budget
Yes.
items, right? So we just got to make sure we're not conflating projects, which are typically one-time capital expenses, with operating, right? Because our operating revenue, our taxes, or what support our operating, our ongoing taxes, support our ongoing expenditures. So, you know, I just want to be clear, because we had the discussion in the back. There's only so many times that you can use that one time to offset the operating.
Right.
Before you got to pay the piper. So we just got to be very clear about what we're doing with that to make sure we don't keep dipping back into that bucket to offset.
So the operating?
Yeah, dipping into the one time to offset the operating is a,
Yeah.
That violates our financial policy
Correct.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's a component of what you're talking about too, that I know that you had sent the note, and we were looking at the villain of Campbell County, and I mean that with love for Greg. But one of the questions, one of the topics we're going to talk about is trash. We have to figure out what that looks like, because remember, we talked about the enterprise funds. There are 5, one of which we should consider as a special revenue, not maybe an enterprise, for waste management. Because you talk about, I thought where you were heading is that we currently, out of the operating, realize that operating that comes in, realistically, it's a pie. It's probably a sliver that all of us, maybe, you know, Larry and I, if we were splitting watching our waste lines, we'd split that pie. It's not very big. And so in thinking through that, realize that we're going into that to offset and help keep costs down for trash that should be,
Right.
or something considered. So you're absolutely, good point about what the one-time component, but also the general fund, just how many things out of the general fund that are being subsidized, parking being one, trash being another. So there are just some interesting things as we get into the budget
Yep.
process that I'm glad you guys are raising the question.
because I look at some of the things that we did in the last 2 years, trash fees, or DMV license fees, that's ongoing revenue that we essentially offset with,
Yeah.
One-time
One-time money.
with one-time money, right? So we
Right.
used one-time money to create a credit to offset ongoing revenue, and that's what I'm talking about. Those are the kind of gimmicks we need to avoid,
Yes.
because
It's not whether or not, it's, depending on what the rubric or the umbrella is, right? So if the rubric or expectation from us is this, tax relief. And 2 years ago, that was the conversation, and it's been subsequent to that. What are the ways in which that we can impact or affect the most relief, whatever that may be, in ways that are impactful? And one of the ways we talked about is how many cars that people own, how many people rent, how many. So it is, you're right, it's coming back online. And I think what I hear Greg saying and what we're projecting is that if we're considering ways in which to provide relief, we're going to have to be very, very specific. And there's just other creative ways that you and your peers had thought to do so. Chris, you were, Mr. Frawley? Or Ms. Reed?
So just to clarify, we're not talking about taking one-time money to go here, because this is operating money. So you're looking, what you were clarifying was we need increased revenue to offset this increased request or need.
Increased it, yeah.
Yeah, increased
That's
need
just-
for these causes. just to make sure everybody, maybe our new colleagues understand, like, that's the difference, is we're not asking to dip into one-time funds for this. We're just saying this is what we're gonna see an increase in, that, in operating, that we're gonna have to find from somewhere.
The cost of providing the same level of service in '26 is going to be more than providing that level of service in '25, and we're going to have to figure out how to either cover those costs or have a conversation around the services that we provide.
Hold on one second. And simultaneously, what we saw was that we've seen a decrease in some of our revenues
Correct.
between meals and lodging. It was meals, lodging.
If we're lumping together sales, meals, hotel, and admissions.
Right.
Those are consumer-driven.
The consumer
revenues.
revenue was down. Okay,
The biggest impact is meals.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
I will say, one caveat, when we're looking at capital versus operating. So yes, the one-time funds for projects can't be conflated with what's in the operating budget. That being said, any project that is being funded with debt is going to generate debt service expenses, right? So those debt service expenses are paid out of the general fund budget. So to the extent that you spend less, that you finance less, you will ultimately impact your your debt service budget less. But it is aligning it to be it's not a one-to-one, but there is definitely an impact across those funds.
But that's a gimmick, right?
You
don't need to answer. Thank you.
So, but just to be clear, when you're looking at revenue growth here to cover operating costs, you're talking about tax revenue increases for the revenue that covers those operating budget items, ongoing things, which is real estate tax, personal property tax,
Or
and so on.
fees. or-
Fees, yeah, there's-
Meals tax, consumer-driven taxes, and so forth. It's that umbrella of items
Yes.
is what covers this.
But the other side is there something we're doing that we should stop?
Right.
Is there an expenditure that we can,
I think Greg and I have
Cut.
had some conversations already.
so, I mean, that is the other side of that.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's the big question for council is, are we doing the right things,
And I
right?
think it goes back to the email that I sent you yesterday, and I think I shared with you and everybody else, is really looking at what's essential, right? Is there a mandate to do it, right? Do we have a commitment to do it? Is there some sort of regional agreement or grant obligation for us to do what we're doing? If it doesn't fall into one of those two things, then whether or not it's essential really is in question. If the state tells us we gotta do it, or the federal government tells us we gotta do it, or we have committed to doing it through some sort of agreement that we've made with a region or another locality, it's reasonable to say that that's an essential service or program. If it's something outside of that, then we're not required to do it, we're not committed to do it, and then that falls into question. Things that we have enabled ourselves locally to do, and the first thing I'll bring up is the rental inspection program. We do the rental inspection program because we've enabled it with city code. If we repeal the rental inspection program from city code, we no longer need it.
And one of the things I was
Just as an example,
It
I'm
was
not
not-
saying that that's the thing to go.
Oh, no. And listen, I love this conversation. What we talked about, and this was one of the exercises that I've done, is that you get the stack of cards and you create essential, non-essential, and your definitions about how to get to each, right? Those definitions, and what we found out earlier today from Mr. Keith, was we think about different things in different ways. I'm a municipal person, been in local government for quite a while. My essentials probably get a bit more finite than someone else's. One of the things, and just having just a moment here, what we saw was a slide that showed park space across the city, and there were 2 wards that it was a name again, right? And so that in considering something, right, you say whether or not the 2 different variables that you pose to it, there could be this element. One of your initiatives is quality of life. Is there an element or aspect that encourages someone to move into Ward 3 or 4 because we've invested in creating a park? Now that, in thinking about whether or not to put that into a capital improvement plan, may not be an essential component, like when we woke up and we used the restroom, brushed our teeth, and put our trash and those kind of things. But what we find is that, remember that base that we're trying to grow as far as tax, that somebody might be encouraged to relocate here because of the aesthetic that we have that includes our parks. And so I hope I'm only amplifying what you're talking about. It's just the elements or aspects that come into. And these are the things where I'm really excited for you guys to roll up your sleeves a little bit. And Mark, if you put in that city staff is proposing a tax increase, my man, please do not do that. We're having a retreat here. We're having a retreat. There is nothing. Poor Gregory. Poor Gregory Patrick has already been the villain of Campbell County. We need to make sure that he's okay. So we are having just a conversation about what it takes to run a city. So.
And I think that's, I love your comments. I think they're great. And I think the point that I'm trying to get across is identify the needs first.
Sure.
That goes to the front end. What are we required or have we committed to do?
Sure.
That goes to the front. And then everything else, then it's, we've
And
got
what
to
you'll
determine
s-
priorities.
And what's interesting, if you revisit, and then we'll move on from there, because I'm making sure of time. If you'll recall, the CIP that you adopted last year was exactly that, a maintenance CIP. There wasn't much by way of authorization that was in a other area that I wouldn't necessarily propose as something a bit more parky, or there was a little bit. Remember, it's usually last year poor Beverly and poor Wyatt as far as some of the approaches that we took. So, but yes, we will layer that in. We got one more
Yep,
presentation.
a couple more, 4 more slides. I think.
4 more slides. All right, hang in, everybody. We're doing it.
Did I go too far? Over here?
One, just one, there.
Yeah.
So, we have not talked about how we ended fiscal year '24 for various and sundry things that came up, but we're here today to do this. So, and I know this is a lot for those of you that may or may not be really familiar with how this process works. So if you'll just bear with me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So it's important, we're talking about the end of fiscal year '24, but you have to back up to the end of fiscal year '23. So our ending unassigned fund balance in the general fund was $68.1 million. Then council decisions through '24 have been made. So we used $23.2 million when council adopted the 24 budget. We did first quarter adjustments of roughly $1 million. 12th Street fell in, and we used $2.4 million of our fund balance. We had a fourth quarter small adjustment of about $300,000. And then in January, at the retreat in January, council made the decision to spend a lot of what was left at the end of '23, what was considered a surplus, and we did one-time projects. And that was about $15.1 million. Then we get to the end of '24, and we had $11.2 million in revenue that was above what we adopted. Give me a minute. I gotcha. And $2.2 million in savings. So out of a $225 million budget, we ended up with excess revenues of 11.2 and savings and expenses of 2.2 million. As we go through the audit process and how we have to do a lot of those adjustments, that was about $900,000. So we ended up the end of fiscal year '24 at $40.4 million. Now let me pause there and answer your question.
No question. Just for those who may go watch on the back end. You're speaking, when you say a year, you're saying fiscal year,
Yes,
which it, again, if you're watching, would be July 1, June 30, not
Correct.
necessarily January through December.
correct, that's our
So
fiscal year.
that's why these dates might get a little bit funky as to how, which council did what at what time.
Okay.
So that's all, I just want everyone to be
Okay,
clear.
okay. Now, if you want to kind of focus in on what's in that $11.2 million, the biggest number that I missed in our revenue projections is our interest on investments. And I talked about how important those are. When we projected this budget in like March of '23 for the '24 budget, interest rates were next to nothing. And so through inflation and all the things that happened, I am happy and proud to present, we had $4.7 million above budget for investments. So that's the biggest chunk of that 11.2 is that $4.7 million. The next biggest chunk was in some miscellaneous revenue. It was $1.8 million, and that's because we sold some property and very small things that just kind of added up this year to about almost $1.9 million above budget. Then we had $1.7 million that we collected over and above what we budgeted for personal property tax. And that 1.7 million is because we actually have fewer vehicles in the city. Because of COVID, they weren't available. People sold their used vehicles because they could get so much more for them. And now, as vehicles have become more available, people are starting to snatch them up, but they are valued way higher than what they normally have been. So therefore, we did miss our personal property tax projection by 1.7 million. Somebody?
Donna, just for the record, that is why I voted against the ratio that we adopted, because I feared it was still too high. I wanted it to be lower. So going back, if you go back and look, there was a vote about the ratio. It's because I didn't feel that we should have been, what, at 97? I forget where the number we ended. 93.
I think we're at
3?
95.
95?
I think we're at 95.
If we can get
maybe,
clarity
between
on-
90 or 95%.
If we can get clarity on it.
Yeah.
But again,
I'll
to my
blame
colleagues,
Mitch for that.
that is one of the levers we can pull, and just for the record, that's why I
Okay,
voted against
yes,
it.
and and that kind of was a pleasant surprise that we ended up that much above our projection. Our real property tax, interestingly enough, we actually were 342,000 below. So we did not exceed our real estate projection. We were actually under that projection. And then another of our biggest ones was about $1.1 million in our delinquent collections. So coming out of COVID, some people did not pay their taxes and has given us an opportunity to kind of get that caught up. So a lot of people, there was some extra federal dollars that went into citizens' pockets, and a lot of them used that to catch their taxes up, so we appreciate that, and that's about $1.1 million. So that's kind of the big chunks of this $11.2 million. So just want to be clear about that. And then our expenditure savings, we had some debt service savings because we did the refunding, so that helped us there. The biggest one that we actually went over budget was our payments to the jail, our per diem payments to the jail. And we did not, we work with them on what their budget estimate is, but we actually owed $1.9 million to the jail for our part of the per diem. So we would have had a larger savings, but we had to pay that money to the jail.
Is that 1.9
Yeah.
over budget? Or
Yes,
okay.
1.9 over budget.
That's what I asked you about before, because I read that in the audit.
Yeah,
And-
yeah,
and
that was over budget.
That blew my mind when I saw that number.
Yeah, it's a big number.
Why is that? Do we know? Do we have an idea what
well-
caused that?
You know, when you get more police officers, they're have more opportunity to make more arrests. So that's part of it.
Have we quantified it to that? Is it actually more arrests, more incarcerations, or is there been an increase in the per diem cost?
No,
Due to
and
inflationary
well, I think
reasons?
the other piece of it is it's not the inflationary on the per diem as much. If there are state prisoners left longer in there, that falls on us as well. So that's been an impact of where the state's not paying their full share. And a big chunk of that comes back on Lynchburg. So,
So what do we need to do to rectify that with the state?
oh, yeah, right. I'm sorry.
Say it.
That just slid right out there.
Tell 'em.
Yeah, we don't win many of those, but,
Okay.
that'd be great if we could talk about the state taking care of their part. I mean, it really is a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, if the state's gonna require us to do something, it's
Yeah.
an unfunded mandate.
Yep, it is. There's a lot of those. Yes,
Scouring through right now, guys, scouring.
yes, good.
If my trend continues, forgive me if I'm beating you to your punch. So what was the total, quote-unquote, unexpected tax revenue that the city received? Because I'm discounting the 4.7 for investments, the 1.8 for property, those type of things.
Oh, it's really just the 1.7.
So $1.7 million was the quote-unquote unexpected, and I'm trying to be very specific with the terms.
Well,
but-
I know, because state code only allows a refund or some type of a give-back program if it's real estate over and above what was budgeted
Yeah.
or personal property.
Certainly, that's not where I was
So-
driving. I was just more
Oh,
like,
okay.
of that sum, because I call it all surplus.
Let us add it all up appropriately.
Yeah,
So
And we'll
1.7.
get it back.
yeah, okay.
Well, let us
Yeah,
add it
because
all
I was
up.
jumping
that's
the gun.
personal
Yeah.
property, but there are.
We'll
I
get it
mean,
out
we-
to you in a
yeah.
memo.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably easier. Okay, so now, that's where we ended 2024. So, as we look at what we did in our fiscal '25 budget, we start with that 40.4 million. In '25, we used $1.4 million of our unassigned fund balance that went into the capital program for some one-time things. And then for first quarter adjustments, we used $1.5 million of this fund balance. That $1.5 million was mostly savings in the police department that they requested be used for some one-time things. There was some new servers that were requested for E911. That was a big chunk of it, and there was a couple of other pieces of equipment, I think, that we did in first quarter adjustment. So now we go back to that financial policy, and if we're gonna budget what needs to be set aside that we're not gonna touch unless the world ends, as long as I'm sitting in this chair, is $26.9 million. So that's our rainy day fund. So that's if we have another derecho that we need to dip into funds to wait for federal funding to come reimburse us. Or like the flood that we had, we turned those expenses in to get reimbursed. They've never been reimbursed. So this stuff happens. So that's what that money's for, yes.
Mark my words, as long as I am here, we will find something else to cut before a single employee is furloughed.
Or look, okay.
Mark my words, as
Okay.
long as I am here, we will find something else to cut before a single employee is furloughed.
Oh, well,
You were here for that.
I was. And yeah,
Won't happen again.
I'm good with that. So, that, and once you subtract that out of our 37.5, our one-time money that we could use, that council can use in the 26 fiscal year budget is the 10.6 million. So that really is your surplus that has not been spent, that's not being held in a rainy day fund, that actually be used for one-time expenditures in 2026. And as I've said, I will always say, please pay for maintenance. But our capital maintenance is one place that money can be used as cash payments, which we call pay-as-you-go, or capital projects where we can use cash payments to reduce borrowing. Like we did with the police department, we used a chunk of money to reduce our borrowing for the police department. Or one-time expenditures, we can make cash payments for fleet purchases, software purchases. I know the police department is still looking at replacing the CAD program at E911. We're eventually going to have to do that. And they've estimated that to be about $1.8 million. So that's still hanging out there. Also demolition. This council has talked about the demolition program, the housing
Housing toolkit.
toolkit, those type of things. That's an option. Property acquisition for economic development. I know in our capital program, we've got a couple of projects for pad-ready sites, things like that will help grow our economic base there, to help our tax growth. So those are just things, options for what we have used that money for in the past. But again, it'll be about $10.6 million. We'll be working with the city manager on what that capital program's gonna look like and present it to council in February.
The bottom line, one-time money, so one-time expenses, and we skipped capital maintenance last year, so we have a
Yes.
real need there.
Yes.
Councilman Faraldi?
It just, I'm being dense. Is that 1.7 you just told me about roped into that 10.6?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Quick question. What is the average cost? I know it's spread depending on the difficulty of the house, but on average, its cost per demolition was what, like between 47 and 80,000, is that?
Oh, no, it's not.
Is our average is 25? Okay, and then what, Greg, do you remember offhand, I know RS Payne is one of the schools that needs the HVAC system replaced. What was the other one? Was it, I don't have the book in front of me, but I'm trying to remember.
I don't have it in
There
front of me.
were-
There's a few, I
Was it
think.
Lincoln?
I know there's several. It
Maybe
could be.
Lincoln Elementary? It's been a while since we've done that one. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, I have my folder,
Bass,
but,
was it Bass? Okay.
okay. Okay.
Cooking with gas. It is just after 2:30. We are scheduled for tour at 3
Oh,
o'clock.
excuse me, toward 3:30.
Tour at 3:30, so travel time we would have, I do encourage you if you can, some of you have seen it.
Yes.
We've talked about it a little bit today. It's something to be really proud of. And know this, when we open in February, your names are going to be on the building. And that's really, really cool. So the council who appropriated the resources for the building, and then the council that cuts the ribbon is going to be there. And that's not necessarily everything you pay attention. I'm just saying that's pretty cool. So that is something to look for. But Mayor, unless there are other questions for city staff, yes, sir, Dr. Wilder.
What's the cost of that pad-ready site? I'm sorry. Do you have an idea for that?
They're in the current CIP, and I do not have
That
it off
is
the top of my
9.
head.
I have 9 in my head. Don't hold me to it.
Okay.
You know, some of the things, what I'm going to do with going with Donna's recommendation, that do pay-as-you-go. We'll show you, because that offsets that credit card bill that you pay each month. But if there are other things that we know that we can use one-time monies for, most recently we talked about the villain from Campbell County and whether or not what we had was a plan, and I'm having fun with that. We're going to have to find, because we don't currently have, and remember, they are not the most popular things, transfer stations. They have this thing, it's an acronym, it's called NIMBY, not in my backyard, right? That happens in local government. And so we're going to have to, unless something happens, and who knows, fingers crossed, we would have to find land that's amenable to many people about whether or not to, so that could be an element or aspect or a one-time cost. That's just one.
Okay. What about the city landfill? What about,
Reopening it, I think once it's capped, and I'm playing a little fast and loose because we had
Yeah.
2 in Norfolk. Once it's capped closed, I don't know that there's no way, no how to reopen, but I believe it's a no way, no how, because it's a federal component, and there's all these leachate and other things that have to come into play that you have to pay attention, and the EPA is very, very,
Yeah.
very, and that's why, what's interesting about ours is that in the Tyriana plan, it's actually something that could be considered as an element or aspect of the overall development. So it's one of those that's more like Mount Trashmore than it was the one in South, if you know Mount Trashmore, I'm sorry, it's referencing Virginia Beach. Then the one that we had on the south side of Norfolk, where the most that we could do would be a solar play. So.
yeah,
But we do have a plan, because just one, digress real quick. Before I arrived, Region 2000 was already at loggerheads between 2-2, and we really labored to get a good plan, and I really commend the city staff on what they did. We landed where we did, but that doesn't mean that we didn't have other things or strategies amidst all that. This coming Tuesday, we're going to give you an update. Candidly, was with Yeah, yahoo! But this is more still a hey.
Quote that.
But we're going to talk to you about, we won't necessarily have everything out to spec, but we're going to talk to you about, because we've got, 20 through 28, is that the current contract?
I think 29 we fill up. 4 years seems like a long time, but
It'll be around the corner.
not a long time.
So, point with that, yeah.
We do have some funds set aside for a transfer station, already in the CIP from a number of years ago. But again, we've got to site it, and we've got to build it, we've got to permit it, so all of those things are timely. So we've got to move pretty quickly.
There's an operating impact to that as well, because we got to stay there.
Correct.
There is, yeah. We're probably better positioned than like Campbell County would be, because we have a refuse operation already.
Remember, we have a whopping 7 trucks with 7 operators.
We all know that, but yes, there's going to be operating impact, and the tipping fees are going to be significantly more expensive.
Well, if that's the end of our discussion. Look forward to our next meeting on, what is that, January 14th?
Yes,
at
sir.
4 o'clock. City Chambers. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.